Hello?
Probably sent carrier pigeons. The skies would have been black with them.
Hello, David. Well, this is quite a surprise.
Do you think I ought to...
Don't you dare leave.
If you love listening to this show, please consider giving a rating and a review on Amazon Alexa or wherever you listen. We want to continue bringing you this amazing content, and part of our ability to do that means that we need a big audience. Now, it may not seem like much, but rating and reviewing the show will help more people find us, just like how you found this show. Simply on any podcast platform, search for a show, scroll down to the bottom, and push 5 stars. It's that easy. Thanks for supporting the show. I'm joined by Tony Martens, who is the co-founder of Plantible Foods, which is a food tech startup with the goal to develop the most functional and applicable food plant-based protein. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you, Scott. I'm glad to be here.
Great. So let's talk about what is Plantible Foods and how are you guys using plant-based to produce whey and dairy protein replacement?
Yeah, so we are a small, humble startup based in San Diego, basically trying to produce the next generation of plant-based food ingredients and indeed starting with a protein. The reason why we're starting with a protein is because we're in the midst of this food revolution where we're trying to replace animal-based products by using plant-based ingredients. And often the key ingredient is the protein. And what we've seen and what a lot of other food companies have experienced is that many of the plant-based proteins that are currently available, so whether it's wheat, soy, or pea, aren't actually adequate replacers of dairy proteins, egg proteins, or meat proteins, forcing these food scientists to add a lot of stabilizing ingredients as well as sugar, salt, and fat to mask the flavor and odor of these traditional plant-based ingredients. So what we did is we actually started to explore the plant-based landscape to identify a specific enzyme that can actually adequately replace these animal-based protein ingredients. And we found that to be ribisco, which has very similar functional as well as nutritional characteristics as dairy proteins or egg proteins.
All right, so I think you were talking about also referred to as lemna, right? Which is referred to as duckweeds. I believe it's a genus of free-floating aquatic plants that are rapidly growing plants that have been used extensively in biopharmaceuticals, as well as a source for animal feeds for agriculture and aquaculture. Why is lemna a superior protein source, and how is it that much, multiple in terms of better than, let's say, beef, or 100 times better than, let's say, soy?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, like I said, what we do is we found this enzyme ribisco, and ribisco is the catalyst in the photosynthesis process. So it can be found in every leafy green on the planet. And it just happens to be that lemna is the most ribisco efficient crop in the world. Lemna doubles in mass every 48 hours. It has around 40 to 45% protein per unit of dry weight. And the fact that it floats on the surface of water also makes it independent from arable land or fertile soil, while due to the fact that it floats, you can actually significantly reduce your water footprint compared to any other traditional crop or commodity, because you can actually recirculate and recycle the water that you use to grow the crop on, having a 24/7, 365-day production schedule with a very high, consistent supply of high-quality protein.
Now, I just want to be clear. Again, we're talking about clean water versus, let's say, it's not possible in ocean water or salty water. And then from a scalability, how would that work? Is this something like, could it, because, it's still a surface area of the water. So whether it's indoor, like the way you guys have it, or outside, let's say, it's still going to take up land mass or water mass, let's say. Is there a way to structure in such a way that it could be almost like vertical farming? So you could have layers or of strips of water that's growing so that you're maximizing the land space and you're not creating additional footprint?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, first of all, there's not a shortage of land, right? There's a shortage of fertile land or arable land. Secondly, in theory, you could build it out vertically. But then again, since you're operating in the food space and the food ingredient space, which is reliant on agriculture, which is one of the most cost-efficient systems model that is capable of competitive with what is already out there. And that's why we've chosen this approach where we're using, let's say, free natural resources like the sun in order to grow our crop, and thereby reducing the cost of production and allowing us to be cost competitive with these traditional ingredients.
So you foresee that as you guys look to scale, it would be almost like a greenhouse effect, so allowing for the proper sun spectrum to come in to provide the photosynthesis, but still be able to have it in a structured fashion. And then does it matter in terms of either the climate or the kinds of sun rays or maybe geographic kind of constraints that needs to be taken into factor?
It's a very good question. I mean, the beauty is, of course, that actually lemna grows. You have different species of lemna growing all over the world, so also more in Nordic countries as well as the southern countries. There will always be areas that are most optimal to grow the crop, right? So the closer you get to the equator with very stable climates and very stable sunlight hours, the better. But in theory, you could actually build these ponds, whether they are in Europe, whether they're in Northern America, so in the southern states or northern states, or in Southern America, Africa, Asia, and let's say Australia, allowing you basically to create these infrastructures anywhere in the world and more or less democratizing the food supply chain, which is currently controlled by, let's say, 2 or 3 centers in the world.
Yeah, that's a very good point indeed. Let's talk a little bit about the characteristics or the attributes of the products that come out of this. My understanding, again, is that because it's not something that is kind of traditional agriculture, it's not subject to, let's say, pesticides or even fertilizers, so it's organic by nature. Is it also free from most allergens, or is it just because we haven't used it enough on the human side to know if there's potential allergens? And my understanding also it has a kind of a neutral taste and an odor and color. Can you talk about that and what that means in terms of ultimately for formulation purposes?
Yeah, good question. So first of all, about the food safety, to your point, actually our protein, so the rubisco that we isolate from the lemna biomass, is known to be allergen free or allergen friendly. The benefit of rubisco is that it's also present in leafy greens, right? So it's also present in kale and spinach. But in our case, we derive it from this aquatic plant. And so far, I think, as far as we've recorded it, there have only been 4 cases of human beings having allergic reactions to rubisco. So that seems to be quite solid. Then if you look indeed at the organoleptic profile, or let's say the taste, odor, and color of the final product, we've chosen to basically build this vertically integrated system that will allow us to tailor the cultivation of the crop in such a way that's beneficial for a downstream process. And then we have designed and build our downstream process in such a way that we take the biomass, we isolate the enzyme that's inside of the biomass, and then along the way remove any color, taste, and smell that could potentially interact with our enzyme. So whether it's being the chlorophyll or the polyphenols or other membrane compounds, we just make sure that these are completely separated from our final product, so that at the end we still have this highly functional protein, but it's neutral in taste, neutral in odor, and neutral in color, and thereby allows food companies to easily integrate it in their product formulations without doing a lot of flavor masking, for example.
And in the process of this manufacturing or isolating the enzymes, is this something that you guys are doing in-house? I think you guys are doing small batches for the time being, but in the long term, do you guys foresee that will be outsourced, or would you continue to insource that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, initially we've indeed chosen to do everything in-house, and first of all, because you have full control over whatever you're doing, you're much more agile in order to adapt your process based on the findings you've gathered. But down the road, we do foresee to, let's say, license out our technology, work with third parties, whether it's on the cultivation of the crop or whether it's on the downstream processing of the biomass, so that we more or less make it more scalable and less capital intensive.
Yeah, so let's talk about folks that are quite familiar with let's say veganism, or people that have been consuming plant-based protein for some time. They're used to things like chickpeas and let's say soy and so forth. How is this different from things like aquafaba, which is a liquid made from chickpeas or other plant-based substitutes? And why is this better in terms of use and the experience for consumers?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I can make it as complex as you want me to. Like in the end, every protein is different, right? So, for example, if you have an egg white, you can't use an egg white to make a steak, right? Or you have myosin, which is like the muscle meat protein. You can't use the myosin to create a meringue. They all have their unique functional properties that allow them to form the textures that we've been able to see in the animal-based product space. Now, if you look at, to your point, the peas, the soy that we've been seeing in the current plant-based food products, they are just there because they happen to be available in bulk, right? You have these huge industrial supply chains for soy, where we're primarily looking at isolating the soybean oil, and then we're left with the co-product, which is the soybean meal, of which the majority goes to animal feed and only a small fraction actually ends up in human nutrition. Same thing for pea, which used to be cultivated to be processed in Asia in order to obtain the starch for vermicelli, and then we would then use the soy protein as an animal nutrition as well. And since they just happen to be available in bulk, companies have been using them because they didn't have many other options. They weren't chosen because they are actually adequate replacements of these animal-based proteins. And then it comes to like solubility, or it comes to foaming capacity and foaming stability. For example, when you use an egg white to create a meringue, or gelation properties that you see, for example, in dairy proteins or in meat that allows them to encapsulate oils and fats to make cheese or meat. And so what you often see if you buy a plant-based meat product, you often see a lot of ingredients that you might not have been exposed to before. These can be gums. These can be like ingredients like methyl cellulose, possibly convoluting the ingredient label. So what we've done is we've been looking for a protein that can actually adequately replace egg whites or adequately replace myosin, so that when you, for example, have an Impossible Foods or a Beyond Meat, they don't need to add all these gums or these hydrocolloids like methyl cellulose, but they can just take our ingredient and create a burger or a chicken tender, for example, with only 5 ingredients.
Yeah, I think that's a very exciting potential. Let's talk a little bit about IP defensibility. So, the process that you're talking about is, it's not super difficult in some sense, right? Where is the IP layer that helps protect you guys from others that are trying to enter this particular market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, quantifying and qualifying difficulty is always hard, right? I think we have 3 pillars that are, let's say, IP sensitive. So first of all the way upstream is, of course, the cultivation and the growing of the crop. It's a novel crop. It has never been grown on large scale before. So optimizing it in such a way in order to feed into the downstream process, meaning that it has a lot of soluble protein, a little polyphenols, and has a certain output on an annual basis per acre, per hectare. These are let's say, the 3 critical factors that we're looking into on a daily basis to ensure that we have optimal growth of the crop. And unfortunately, there's not a lot of literature available, and there are very specific growth. There are a lot of very specific growth variables that could influence the cultivation of the crop that we're discovering internally, and for which we're building, let's say, software as well as hardware sensors to collect those data points and to optimize our cultivation practices. And secondly, we go into the downstream processing of the biomass, basically having designed and built our own extraction process that allows us to isolate this enzyme while also removing color, taste, and smell along the way without denaturing the protein and thereby losing the functionality. That has basically been an area that has been our core IP from the beginning. Mm-hmm. And then last but not least is also the food application side. It's a completely new ingredient which has never been commercialized before. So identifying how it can be optimally integrated in various food products and thereby educating your customers on how to optimally integrate it in their product provides us with a lot of unique learnings at the beginning and also a lot of IP, allowing us to control the commercialization of our ingredient.
So in those 3 tiers that you talked about, are there actual provisional patents or patent filings planned to help protect some of those methods and approaches?
Yeah. So we've filed one. We already filed a non-provisional patent, and we're working on a second provisional patent as we speak.
Okay. Let's quickly go over the FDA process that you guys are in, the classification that you're in, and the kind of time frame, and the kind of capital cost that's involved for you guys to get to a point of FDA approval.
Yeah, sure. So the process that's here in the US is called the GRAS process from the FDA perspective. So generally recognized and safe. And we have started to build our dossier on food safety. And we actually are working on our final draft, and we expect to submit our dossier in the next couple of months. We're still waiting on some data from, let's say, shelf life stability that needs to be incorporated. Once again, we have the benefit that Lemna has already received a GRAS approval by the FDA in the past, while Rubisco, the enzyme that we're actually isolating, is already consumed by billions of people on a daily basis because it's in every leafy green. So combining those factors will hopefully help us in having a smooth process with the FDA in the coming year. The expectation is that as soon as we file the, let's say, self-acclaimed GRAS dossier, that we'll get a initial approval from the FDA, which is basically a no questions asked letter after 30 days. And then you'll still need approximately a year for the FDA to provide its formal approval on your documentation. Question is, like, what are the resources currently available at the FDA, obviously, that are working, that are not working on the, let's say, corona vaccine. So how much time will they have to, let's say, continue to do their due diligence on these GRAS approvals? But yeah, so we expect to have everything, a formal FDA approval, let's say, by the beginning of 2022.
Today I've been joined by Tony Martens, who is the co-founder of Plantible Foods. Thanks again.
Thank you, Scott.
If you've enjoyed this episode, take a moment to rate our show on any podcast platform that you listen to. Scroll down to the bottom and push 5 stars. It's that easy. And as always, thanks for listening.